Your hips are your body's protector. Let me explain. Okay, so first we need to understand what I'm talking about when I say the hips, right? Because the hips are a joint. I'm talking about the surrounding muscles of the hips, specifically the psoas, the iliacus, and the pelvic floor muscles. So your psoas, we've talked about it in the past, it attaches in your lumbar spine or your lower back, and it wraps around to the femur or the top of your thigh. And this is the primary hip flexor muscle. It's a deep postural muscle, super important in your posture, and it's the main muscle for threat response. Then there's the iliacus, which is basically the psoas's partner in crime, right? So the iliacus originates at the inner bowl of the pelvis, at what we call the iliac fossa, but then it joins the psoas on its way to the femur. So then it ends up with the psoas in the femur. Like I said, they are partners in crime. So when the psoas braces, the iliacus braces, and oftentimes you'll hear it referred to as the iliopsoas complex because they're just so intertwined. Then we have the pelvic floor muscles. So the pelvic floor muscles are a bunch of muscles. Key ones are the levator ani group and the coccygeus. They're basically this hammock of muscles that runs across your pelvis from your pubic bone to your tailbone, and they protect your vital organs. They are deeply involved with threat response, and they specifically co-contract with the iliopsoas complex. So together, these three muscles, or muscle group and two other muscles, form a functional unit. So basically what happens is the pelvic floor muscles support from below, and the iliopsoas complex supports from in front and above. So another thing to note, if you do a lot of yoga, if you're interested in yoga practice and you do deep hip openers, specifically pigeon pose or figure four pose, these hip openers are not actually targeting the muscles that we're talking about and the muscles that are really important in threat response, unfortunately. They are targeting external hip rotators like the piriformis muscle, which is definitely involved in the bracing process downstream though. Basically what happens, and we'll talk more about this, but the iliopsoas and the pelvic floor braces, and then as those muscles are bracing, it's going to engage the muscles around it, some of the muscles around it being your external hip rotators. So it is still important to do these kind of hip openers and stretches, but it's not actually targeting the root cause of the tension. The root cause of the tension is much deeper. These muscles, like the piriformis, are quite superficial. So just keep that in mind if you're doing a lot of yoga practice and you're like, oh, but I do a ton of hip openers. Yeah, but most of those hip openers are not actually targeting these specific muscle groups, unfortunately. So as we know, our nervous system is constantly scanning for threat. And when a threat is present, there are three responses: fight, flight, or freeze. And the explanation for that is all polyvagal theory. I know that you guys have been asking me to do a video on polyvagal theory. I promise I'm getting to it. There's just so much good information and so much good concept that I'm really excited to share with you guys. But I promise I'm gonna do a whole series because there's so much. Polyvagal theory is coming. But fight, flight, or freeze. The iliopsoas are the primary muscles that execute this response. Let me say that again. The iliopsoas are the primary muscles that execute this response. So what does that mean? Well, when you're getting ready to fight or to flee, the iliopsoas muscles contract so that you're getting ready to run or go towards something. The iliopsoas muscles are your main muscles for running and walking. Okay, so they contract to propel you forward in fight or flee. In freeze, the iliopsoas muscles curl inwards to protect your vital organs. So either way, they're contracting. Whatever the response is, they're contracting in a different way for a different reason, but they're still bracing and causing tension. Now, whatever the iliopsoas muscles do, the pelvic floor typically follows because it's that bottom piece, right? And they act, like I said, as a functional unit. So this would be great if most of our threats were acute stress threats, right? This was awesome when we were like in hunter-gatherer times and we were being chased by a predator and we needed to respond immediately, and then that threat went away and we could then relax, right? Because the way that the system is structured is it's meant for an acute threat response and it's meant for the signal to go away. It's meant to respond and then have a safety signal so then the iliopsoas and the pelvic floor can relax. The problem is that most people in the society are under chronic stress, low-grade chronic stress. So that means you constantly have a low threat level signal running simultaneously in the background, which means that this muscle complex never really gets the all clear that it is safe to stop bracing. So it's always slightly bracing, which causes problems. And as we know, the body does not distinguish from physical versus emotional threat. So if you have suppressed emotions, suppressed anger, suppressed grief, uncomfortable family dynamics, whatever it is, and those emotions have not been able to find an outlet, that means that you are storing those emotions in your body, and likely you are storing them in your iliopsoas muscles and in your pelvic floor, and whatever issues that you're having upstream of that are typically upstream, right? There are times, like we talked about the suboccipitals, there are times where you are storing tension mainly in your suboccipitals, but a lot of the time, suboccipital tension can actually come upstream of this kind of tension, because when your iliopsoas complex and your pelvic floor are bracing, your pelvis can tilt anteriorly or tilt forward, and it causes this chain of compensation up your spine all the way to your suboccipital muscles. And the muscles of your pelvis and your suboccipital muscles are directly paired because they're at the either end of the chain. So when there's a ton of tension in your pelvis, your suboccipital muscles are going to compensate and therefore also have a ton of tension. And like I said, it's very difficult to release those. I gave a release technique for people that don't have structural issues. Again, I said this in another video, but if you have Chiari or CCI or any kind of hypermobility or structural issues, please do not try to release your suboccipitals on your own. Go to the doctor, have a trained facilitator work with you and help you to do it in a safe way. Because I can't, like that's out of my wheelhouse. But for those of you that don't have any structural issues, the suboccipital release should be fine. Anyway, back to the hips. So if your body doesn't distinguish from a physical or an emotional threat, when you have suppressed emotions, typically they reside in your iliopsoas and in your pelvic muscles, particularly your pelvic floor. So what does this mean for you, right? Typically this means that you have a lot of tightness in your hips. So when you're walking and when you're running, other muscles are compensating for that. This can cause intense pelvic cramping, and it can make cramping during the menstrual cycle much worse than it would be naturally. This can also cause chronic constipation because those muscles are right around where your large intestine exits your body. And so basically your large intestine goes like this, up and around. And so either end, the start and the end of your large intestine are right where those muscles are. And if they're chronically tight and chronically bracing, it can put pressure on your large intestine and cause your waste to not move out of your body properly, aka chronic constipation, which can cause other problems and cause more tension. So we're going to do a part 2 and a part 3. Part 2 is going to talk about specifically anger as a protection emotion and why anger is specifically stored in these areas. And part 3 is going to talk about, okay, what can I do about it? I'm going to give you techniques, particularly movement and breath, and an acupressure point that works really, really well to help release tension in this area and release suppressed anger and sometimes the emotions that are underneath it. I hope that this was as interesting to you as it was to me. I'm sending you so much love. Bye!